Thank you. And 15 minutes to talk about ethics. That's amazing. And for those who've met me before, know that I can speak quite fast, but rest assured, I won't. So, but it is a tall order, but helped hugely by the people who've already gone before me, because lots of people have referred to the importance of things like consent, etc. So hopefully I'll be able to hook into some of those things that have already been mentioned. So, great to be here again, and I've been at the last couple, and lots of new things are happening. So today what I want to talk about is the ethics of involving children. And what I'm going to suggest to everybody here is that includes three groups, really, when we talk about it. We need to be talking about children and the child, parents and healthcare professionals. They're the three groups, and what you'll see today is, as I go through my 15 minutes, I'm going to just focus on each of those groups and say something about how we can then tie all that together, because we are a triad when we come to think about how we manage working with children and parents. So that's the focus for today. There's all sorts of things I could have said quickly, but some of these things we've thought about already in terms of right and wrong decisions. We've had ethics and the law, and there are many different terms associated with the things that we could talk about today. But you, if you're interested, of course, you can go and read a whole load of information about all of these things. And I just want to bring to your attention some of the things that I'm finding particularly helpful now in some of the work that we are doing. So what I want to, and some of you may know about some of these things, but I want to take the opportunity to make sure, I suppose, that you do. And I'm going to talk first about the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health new charter for children. I just wanted to flag that up because that's very new, and that's called Research in Us. Say something very small about consent and assent, because they're the only two things I will focus on today. But again, drawn your attention to documents, and I know last year Danielle showed everybody the one about the Nuffield bioethics, and I just want to do another mention about that and what's happening with that work, and then talk a little bit about meaningful assent, and then finally thinking about, in terms of professionals, then what helps and what helps us work in terms of this triad. So first of all, the charter, which was the Royal College working with children and young people, and it was really around what we need to know and what they're telling us that's important in terms of research. Now, this is quite new, if nobody's seen it, and there's various things that you can look at in relation to this. And I'm just going to give you the kind of top level, really. And again, remember, this comes from young people. So remember, it's about me, and that's about being involved in all stages, but keeping me safe from harm, to empower me and my family, to understand, feel more confident about research. You remember Kathy's slide at the beginning, where that parent says, I didn't know until I got to the phase 3. We need to be in the future, not necessarily telling stories like that. Support me, engage with me and my family, listen to our questions and ideas so we can help you to help us benefit from research. Actively gain my consent or assent, and that's the bit I'm going to just focus on a little bit more. Rights are important, my right to understand, my right to make decisions, my right to be informed and respected, and communicate with me directly and clearly, and I'll pick up on some of that when I talk about the Nuffield work. And then also, children thought it was important that to help others by sharing stories. We've already been here about the importance of those things, but what worked and what things didn't work and help. So, just a couple of slides about consent and assent. Everybody here knows this. So, legally informed consent for children's participation is given by those who have parental responsibility for the child. And assent is seen as the process by which children give affirmative agreement in some way that they are happy for that research to be undertaken. And it's something around demonstrating some kind of understanding, but remember, it's not legally valid. And just, and again, this is stuff we know, so who, and I'm using here clinical trial or other kind of agents, yeah, and the law is very clear at a certain point. So that for, you need to gain consent for anyone under 16. But here is some of the work that I do more, which is around not a clinical trial, and it's around thinking about who do we involve, who do we give information to when it's not a treatment and it's other kinds of questions that we may ask. So consent must be valid, informed and voluntary, and participants in any kind of research must have enough information to make an uncoerced, deliberate judgment about whether or not to participate. And just remember those things when we think about when we're working with children. Elements of assent, I've already said, is slightly different, and this is where we want to be sure that children do have an understanding, and it's relevant to their capacity of understanding, including risks and benefits. And this is where the Nuffield work has been absolutely instrumental, I think, in pushing forward how we might think differently about this, so that young children would know about refusal to take part or withdraw, and information must be given by staff with experience of working with children. How do we best communicate this information to children in the right way so that they do understand? And that's not necessarily just about an information leaflet. There are many other ways that we can do this. But there is a spectrum of views, which is why the Nuffield work was done, where we have differences of opinion between medical nursing, social work, about what does consent mean and what does assent. And there's been a lot of debate in the professional press about the differences between these. And probably most of it can be based around this kind of continuum here, where people have different views about children in society, whether we see children as active agents, whether children are dependent, in need of protection, and whether they can be involved in decisions. And one of the really important things in the Nuffield work was around vulnerability and getting people to really think differently about what vulnerability means. And it's not just a label for not doing something, it's a label to make sure that we understand. So assent, why does it matter? So what we argue, and Nuffield is arguing, that actually there is a role for assent. I've already said to you that there's been quite a lot of debate in the literature. And for us, I just wanted to say why we, as a body of researchers, think it's quite important. And it's about respecting the rights of children. It's about making sure they are consulted, involved, and that they understand the consequences of their research participation if they say yes or if they say no. We would argue that it's more likely that children will make an informed, voluntary and possible longer-lasting commitment to research if they understand what it's about. So this is the work we brought last year to show people, and the children's cancer community were very involved in shaping what this looks like. This involved children, parents, carers and professionals, lots of consultation. There's a fantastic video that you can take off YouTube to have a look, but I'm only going to pick out the highlights for you in terms of what we wanted to talk about today. But there are some key points in the document which, if Catherine Wright was here, she would be stressing to you. So that good research must happen. Children aren't passive. Even very young children can and do express their wishes about how they want to live their lives. Research with children, not on children. And that may just sound like a small change, but that's really important that that's a message that we give. And I've just got a couple of slides from this particular work that I thought was relevant to share with you today. We've heard already that children are not just small adults, and they differ in two fundamental issues: the way in which children develop from newborn babies to young adults, and the role played by children's parents or others taken on the role. These are the things we need to consider when we think about consent and assent. What should parents think about respecting children as individuals? They will be doing that already. Recognise their developing capacity to make decisions for themselves, and concern for their immediate and long-term welfare. And we look to families to have that clearly in their sights. And what they argue in the document is that there are three situations that they want you to encourage you to think about, whether you're a parent or a professional. And again, one of the fundamental things about the document is it tries to get us to think beyond age, because as we all know, age isn't necessarily particularly helpful, particularly when you've got a child who's relapsed, who actually has a lot of experience and a lot of understanding beyond their years. So it gets you to think, as I say, slightly differently. And they give you three scenarios, and what they do in the document is they give you some words from children about these. But I'm not going to focus on that, I'm just going to give you the three scenarios. So they argue that there are three distinct groups. There are children and young people who can't say what they think about research, about their participation in research. And that could be babies, very young children, older children who are unconscious or just too unwell to participate. The second group is children and young people who can say what they think about taking part in research, but can't yet make a decision on their own. And this could include children as young as 3 years. And then there's a third group, which is children and young people who are able to make their own decision, but are not yet treated as adults by the law of their country. And again, the law of the country is really important internationally, because as we all know, that's very different. And they would argue that the families that we are working with as professionals will fit into these three groups. So leave aside age. It's based on your understanding what assent and consent is, but think about these things when you're thinking about communicating. But the responsibility remains with professionals, and it would be remiss of me, having just spent, or coming up to 10 years on an ethics committee, not to mention to you the importance of parents to understand the role of the ethics committee to make sure some of these things are in place in terms of protective and a facilitative role. That invitation to take part in research must be a fair offer, and that's the kind of things we often look at, and that as a committee we have the right expertise, and by that I mean people who do research or understand children. And what we've done is we've tried to take the Nuffield work and think a bit more about it and what it means to people in practice. So this is some work we've just had published this year, but we want to go on and work with people, parents, professionals, to think about how we can get the Nuffield bioethics work into practice. That might mean developing some kind of benchmark that helps people to use it. So if anybody's interested in joining us in that work, please come and talk to us in the lunch break. But this is what we've offered in that paper. And it's really getting people to think about how you can individualise assent, which is what the Nuffield work is really saying. That age is just one part of that. There are many other things that we should be considering. And you can look at the paper to look at some of this detail, which is around whether it be family dynamics or something about the child, something about whether they are able to speak, and that's not necessarily age-related, their method of communication. So for children who have got a disability or are unable to communicate, how else do we find out from them what it is they're thinking about? And this is offering people an algorithm to think about how they might make decisions about who they involve, when they involve. But the key thing here is around ongoing involvement. None of this is one-off, which is why you see these arrows going in different ways, because there's no end product, because in our research you would go back and ensure that understanding continued throughout the research. So this is just taking Nuffield work and applying it to help people in practice. But again, for professionals, so I've talked about children and parents and now professionals, there is heaps that you can read, and there's lots of examples about how and what it means to take assent with a family and how that happens in practice, and you can go ahead and read all of these things. And of course, there are many guidelines that help us, whether that's about consent or assent or just involving children in any kind of research. So you can read all of these things. But finally, I do want to say about what brings some of these things together. And it is about patient and public involvement in research. And I think Kathy was talking about this, and we've all referred to this. And that's really, I suppose, why we're here today, and there's work this afternoon. It's thinking about how we can, as professionals and families, work together to think about how we might think about the people who are receiving therapy at the point of the design, all the way through in terms of their participation. And in terms of, I said already, that information leaflets, I think there's quite a lot of focus in ethics about information leaflets. And I want you to take away today that it's an awful lot more, not just about information. And one of the final point I wanted to make in terms of some of this work, we've mentioned already about patient-public involvement being asked for in terms of those initial applications to ethics. But I can tell you, after X years on the ethics committee, that particular question, and I should always remember the number, is badly answered. So I'm saying to you, actually, there are many members of our professional community who really don't understand what public involvement, patient and public involvement really means in terms of research. So we've still got quite a long way to go. But in terms of ethical issues, we'll only really explore some of those things by if you like, working together. And I want to say thank you for listening. Thank you.